On the night of June 25, 2009, Dr. Conrad Murray administered a dose of propofol, a powerful surgical anesthetic, to a man lying in his own bedroom. Not in a hospital. Not in an operating room. In a rented mansion in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. And when Michael Jackson stopped breathing, there was no crash cart, no defibrillator, no emergency oxygen. Just a doctor, a phone, and 60 agonizing seconds before anyone called 911. That single fact, confirmed by court records, phone logs, and Murray's own statement to detectives, became the center of one of the most scrutinized medical cases in modern history. But to understand how a 50-year-old man came to need a surgical anesthetic just to fall asleep, you have to go back much further. Because what happened that night didn't begin in 2009. It began with a system that had been failing him for years. Jackson had not slept naturally in months. According to testimony presented at Murray's 2011 criminal trial, the artist had been suffering from severe, chronic insomnia, the kind that no sleeping pill, no melatonin, no relaxation technique could touch. He was rehearsing for the This Is It tour, 50 concerts at London's O2 Arena, and the pressure was immense. E.g. Live, the concert promoter, had invested tens of millions. The shows were sold out. The world was watching. And Jackson, by his own reported words to Murray, told the doctor he needed to sleep or he would simply die. Murray had been hired as Jackson's personal physician for approximately $150,000 a month. He had no hospital admitting privileges in Los Angeles. He had a history of financial trouble. At the time of Jackson's death, court records showed Murray owed over $780,000 in back child support across multiple cases. He was, by most accounts, a man who needed this job. And that created a dynamic that no one at AEG, no one in Jackson's inner circle, and no regulatory body ever formally questioned. But that was only the beginning. For 6 weeks before June 25, Murray had been giving Jackson propofol nightly. Not once. Not occasionally. Every single night, according to Murray's own account, delivered under the clinical euphemism of treatment for insomnia. Propofol, the same drug used to render patients unconscious before surgery, was being dripped into Jackson's arm in a bedroom equipped with 4 poles, pulse oximeters, and oxygen tanks that Murray had personally ordered and shipped to the house. A makeshift ICU. Hidden from almost everyone who worked there. The question that prosecutors would later drive to the heart of a criminal trial was not simply what Murray gave Jackson that night. It was why no one stopped it sooner. Phone records entered into evidence showed that on the morning of June 25, 2009, while Jackson lay sedated in his bedroom, Murray made and received a series of personal phone calls lasting a combined 47 minutes. At 11:51 a.m., Murray told investigators he noticed Jackson had stopped breathing. He did not call 911 immediately. The call that should have taken seconds took approximately 12 minutes to place, according to the timeline reconstructed by Los Angeles detectives. And in those 12 minutes, those 12 documented, court-confirmed, never fully explained minutes, everything that came after was already in motion. What Murray did in that room and why and who else knew what was happening inside that house on North Carrollwood Drive? That is where the real story begins. The first person Murray called was not paramedics. It was Michael Jackson's personal assistant, Michael Amir Williams. At 12:13 p.m., Williams received the call and immediately alerted Alberto Alvarez, Jackson's head of security, who was downstairs in the same house. Alvarez ran upstairs. What he saw when he entered that bedroom, confirmed in his own trial testimony, would become one of the most haunting details of the entire case. Jackson was on the bed, eyes open, mouth open, not moving. And Murray was performing CPR. On a bed. Not on the floor, not on a hard surface as every emergency protocol requires, but on a soft mattress. A technique that, according to medical experts who testified at trial, significantly reduces the effectiveness of chest compressions. Even in that moment, something was wrong about the response. Alvarez testified that Murray then handed him 3 bottles and a 4 bag and told him to put them in a bag. To hide them. Before the paramedics arrived. And nobody could have predicted what came next. Los Angeles Fire Department paramedics arrived at 12:26 p.m., 13 minutes after that first call to Williams, not to 911. When they entered the bedroom, they found Jackson unresponsive with a fixed, dilated left pupil. A fixed, dilated pupil is a clinical indicator of severe brain injury. Paramedic Richard Sinneff testified that when he asked Murray what medications Jackson had been given, Murray mentioned only lorazepam. He did not mention propofol. Not a word about the anesthetic that toxicology would later confirm was present in Jackson's blood at a concentration consistent with general anesthesia. That omission, those missing words in a 90-second conversation, may have shaped everything that followed. At 1:07 p.m., Jackson was pronounced dead at Ronald Reagan UCLA Medical Center. He was 50 years old. But the propofol was only part of what the coroner found. The Los Angeles County autopsy, conducted by Dr. Christopher Rogers and released as part of the public court record, confirmed that Jackson's blood contained not only propofol but also lorazepam, midazolam, diazepam, lidocaine, and ephedrine, a constellation of drugs that painted a picture of a man being chemically managed, night after night, by a physician operating entirely outside any standard of care. Dr. Rogers ruled the manner of death homicide, not in the colloquial sense, but in the forensic classification, meaning the death was caused by the actions of another person. That determination, made officially, quietly, in a county medical examiner's office, set in motion a criminal investigation that would take 2 years to reach a courtroom. And that changed everything. Murray was arrested on February 8, 2010, and charged with involuntary manslaughter. His trial began September 27, 2011, in Department 30 of the Los Angeles Superior Court before Judge Michael Pastor. Over the course of 6 weeks, the prosecution called 33 witnesses. They played audio recordings of Jackson himself, slurred, barely coherent, recorded by Murray on his iPhone on May 10, 2009, as evidence of how compromised Jackson had become in the weeks before his death. The defense argued Murray had acted in good faith, that Jackson had administered a fatal dose of propofol himself in a moment Murray wasn't watching. It was a claim that hinged on a single, unwitnessed moment. But the phone records told a different story. On the morning of June 25, between 11:07 a.m. and 11:51 a.m., the 44 minutes during which Murray claimed he stepped away briefly, Murray had been on his cell phone. Not for seconds. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you like this story. Physician could simultaneously monitor a sedated patient receiving propofol through an 4-line. The prosecution's expert, Dr. Stephen Schaefer, one of the world's leading authorities on propofol pharmacology and a professor at Columbia University, testified that leaving a patient alone while propofol was actively infusing was, in his words, a gross deviation from the standard of care. Not a minor lapse. Not a judgment call. A gross deviation. And that phrase would echo through the courtroom for weeks. The defense had one answer to all of it: Jackson did it himself. But nobody could have predicted what came next. Dr. Paul White, the defense's own expert witness and a former colleague of Dr. Schaefer's, took the stand and attempted to demonstrate how Jackson could have injected a fatal bolus of propofol into his own 4-line while Murray was out of the room. It was a theory built on possibility, not evidence. And when prosecutor David Walgren cross-examined White for hours across multiple sessions, something remarkable happened. White conceded, point by point, that Murray had deviated from accepted medical standards. He conceded that propofol should never be used outside a clinical setting. He conceded there was no documented medical literature supporting propofol as a treatment for insomnia. The defense's own witness, under oath, dismantled the very framework he had been called to defend. The courtroom went quiet in a way that reporters in the gallery described as almost physical. On November 7, 2011, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty. Conrad Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in the death of Michael Jackson. Judge Pastor sentenced him to 4 years in the Los Angeles County Jail. He served 2, released early due to overcrowding on October 28, 2013. He walked out of jail and, within days, gave a television interview in which he said he felt no guilt. None. And that changed everything people thought they understood about who was truly accountable. Because Murray's conviction answered one question and opened a dozen others. The trial had deliberately, structurally, kept its focus narrow: one doctor, one patient, one night. But the evidence introduced during 6 weeks of testimony had quietly outlined something far larger. AEG Live executives had exchanged emails in the weeks before Jackson's death expressing concern about his physical condition during rehearsals. One email, sent by AEG production executive Paul Gongaware on June 14, 2011, 11 days before Jackson died, referenced keeping Murray focused on getting Jackson ready for the shows. The full weight of those emails would not be tested in a criminal courtroom. They would surface years later in a separate civil lawsuit brought by Jackson's mother, Catherine, against AEG Live, a case that asked a question Murray's trial never had to answer. Did the concert promoter share responsibility for the conditions that led to that bedroom on North Carrollwood Drive? That civil trial began in April 2013 and lasted 5 months, becoming the longest civil trial in Los Angeles County history. But something emerged during that trial that had never been fully aired before. Witnesses testified about the months of rehearsals at the Staples Center, where Jackson would sometimes arrive hours late, visibly disoriented, unable to complete full run-throughs of choreography he had performed for decades. Director Kenny Ortega, who had worked with Jackson since the Bad Tour in 1987, sent an email to AEG executives on June 20, 2009, 5 days before Jackson's death, describing Jackson as very disturbing and not well. He wrote that Jackson appeared lost and scared. That email was followed by a meeting the next day, June 21, at Jackson's home, attended by Murray, Ortega, and AEG executive Randy Phillips. What was said in that meeting and what decisions were made became fiercely contested territory. Murray told investigators one version. Ortega described another. Phillips remembered it differently still. 3 men, 1 meeting, 3 irreconcilable accounts, and no recording, no minutes, no neutral witness. Nobody could have predicted what would come out next. Because buried inside thousands of pages of AEG internal documents entered into evidence was something that stopped legal analysts mid-sentence. A contract. Murray's contract, the one that would have paid him $150,000 a month, had never actually been signed. Not by AEG. Not formally executed. Which raised a question that neither side in the civil trial could cleanly answer. If Murray was never officially under contract, then under whose authority was he operating in that house, with those drugs on that? The unsigned contract sat at the center of everything like a door no one could open from either side. AEG argued it meant Murray was Jackson's doctor, not theirs, hired by the artist, answerable only to him. Katherine Jackson's attorneys argued the opposite. That AEG had controlled the terms, the salary, the conditions, and that a piece of paper with missing signatures didn't erase 6 weeks of emails, phone calls, and a daily working relationship between Murray and AEG's production team. The jury in that civil case deliberated for 13 days. On October 2, 2013, they returned a verdict in favor of AEG. They found that Murray was Jackson's employee, not AEG's, and that therefore the company bore no legal liability for his death. The family said they would appeal. The legal system moved on. And the world was left with a verdict that answered the legal question while leaving the human one completely untouched. Because here is what the record shows, stripped of courtroom strategy and legal definitions. A man who had not slept naturally in months was being put under general anesthesia every night in his bedroom by a doctor who was not board certified in anesthesiology, using equipment that had been ordered through a Las Vegas pharmacy and shipped to a rented house, while dozens of people, executives, assistants, security staff, production managers, moved through the orbit of that home every single day. The propofol wasn't hidden in a cabinet. The 4 poles were visible. The oxygen tanks were there. And in all those weeks, in all those interactions, not one person with the authority to intervene ever did. And that is the part that doesn't go away. Murray lost his medical license in California, Nevada, Hawaii, and Texas following his conviction. He has given interviews over the years in which he has maintained that he loved Michael Jackson, that he was trying to help him, that history has judged him unfairly. In 2016, he told a British documentary crew that Jackson had begged him for propofol and that he had tried to wean him off it. He spoke about the artist the way a man speaks about someone he genuinely cared for. And that may even be true. It may be entirely possible to care deeply about someone and still be the instrument of their destruction. Both things can exist at once. The court record does not require you to choose. What the court record does show is this. On May 10, 2009, 46 days before Jackson died, Murray recorded him on an iPhone. Jackson's voice on that recording, played to a silent courtroom in October 2011, is almost unrecognizable. Slow. The words arriving as if from somewhere far away. He talks about wanting to build a children's hospital. He talks about what it means to be the biggest entertainer in the world. He sounds like a man trying very hard to hold on to something that is already slipping. The prosecution played it as evidence of impairment. But listening to it without the legal frame, it sounds like something else entirely. It sounds like a man who was exhausted in a way that no amount of sleep, chemically induced or otherwise, was ever going to fix. He was 50 days from death when that recording was made. And nobody in that room pressed stop and said, "We need to do something different." The This Is It tour never happened. The O2 Arena dates were cancelled within hours of the news breaking on June 25. The rehearsal footage was eventually released as a documentary film that grossed over $260 million worldwide, more than most living artists earn in a decade. The machine that had been built around those 50 concerts found a way to keep generating revenue even after the man at its center was gone. That fact is not an accusation. It is simply what the record shows. Michael Jackson was buried on September 3, 2009, at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. 3,000 people attended the private service. Millions watched the public memorial at Staples Center 2 months earlier, in the same building where he had rehearsed until he couldn't anymore. His 3 children stood on that stage. The oldest was 12. Conrad Murray served 730 days. He is free. He occasionally speaks publicly. He has expressed a desire to practice medicine again in other countries, though his U.S. licenses remain revoked. The propofol that was found in Michael Jackson's blood on June 25, 2009, had been ordered through a pharmacy in Las Vegas, shipped in quantities that prosecutors described as far exceeding any legitimate clinical purpose, and administered in a bedroom by a man who, by his own account, fell asleep while his patient lay sedated beside him. A doctor. A bedroom. A drug designed for operating rooms. And a system of people, contracts, pressures and silent decisions that made it possible for all of it to continue night after night for 6 weeks. The court decided who was criminally responsible. It decided who was civilly liable. It produced verdicts and appeals and legal definitions that filled thousands of pages. But there is one question no courtroom ever formally asked, and no verdict has ever answered. Who was supposed to be watching?